Pastor Lee John Kay of the Yuanyang County Central House Church in Xianxiyang, Henan Province in China is currently serving a prison sentence of 5.5 years after protesting the government's attempts to remove the cross atop his church building in 2019. They succeeded, by the way. Mass removals of church crosses from churches' buildings began in Henan Province in 2018, with police removing at least 4,000 crosses over the course of just 1 year. Even the crosses of government-run churches were removed, and smaller churches were completely shut down. It's rare to see a cross in Henan Province these days. When authorities brought a crane to remove the cross from Pastor John Kay's church on February 20th, 2019, a group of Christian senior citizens, mostly women, met the plainclothes policemen and the crane. The Christians sang hymns and prayed while attempting to keep the authorities from taking the cross. Police beat and arrested the protesters before forcing the church gate open and removing the cross. Pastor John Kay told the workers they should proceed accordingly to the law and that he opposed the removal of the crosses. He was arrested and accused of disrupting public service. Now, the next day, religious affair authorities removed signs from inside the church building and forced church members to fly China's national flag from the front of the church. Many churches are now required to do the same, along with hanging an image of President Xi Jinping in the sanctuary and installing security cameras facing the congregation. 1984, anybody? Pastor John Kay was charged with embezzlement and obstructing government administration. He was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison and given a fine of more than $7,000. Let's talk about a life lived on faith. In comparison to Pastor John Kay's troubles and situations here in America and many other countries, we have it easier than what he is having to go through currently. So let's just all remember to keep Pastor John Kay in our prayers. But when I hear of stories, modern day stories, telling about lives that have to obviously be lived on a tremendous amount of faith, it causes me to take pause. Now, I'm not trying to belittle anything that the Christian guy has had to go through in the past 2 or 3 years here in America, because we also have a strong amount of attacks and losses when it comes to our lifestyle and our freedoms. Now, most people would probably disagree with me who don't completely understand exactly where I'm coming from, but it was not that long ago that I was charting routes myself around the region that I live in because I was being threatened to not have the ability to travel on the interstates. So I would say, even in the smallest degree, we have been given the opportunity for a wake-up call here in this country when it comes to what truly are things that are truly freely given and things that have the ability to be taken away. I initially was going to begin this topic with simple first world problems. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to get gas in the car? But then I went over to persecution.com and was once again given a very solid reminder of the blessings which we have today. With so much persecution going on in this world that goes completely unchecked by the American Christian culture, it's shocking to me that I sometimes grumble about some of the smallest things. I'm just referring to myself here, so please don't take anything about this portion as guilt upon you. I'm just simply talking about guy stuff with guys. So for this point today, I really want to think a little bit more deeply than we typically do in our culture on what faith is in the purest form. What does an actual life lived on faith look like in today's American culture? Acknowledging faith today. Christian guys understand the fact that today's world scoffs at the idea of having faith. We hear so often people saying, I don't have to have faith in God. I have faith in myself. That's all there is to this world, or if there is an ambivalent being or deity above me, he or she is up there and I'm down here, and so on and so on and so on. Now, I've had many conversations with non-Christians and nominalist Christians who believe that faith is not really relevant in today's society anymore. I don't think they truly grasp the fact of how absurd this idea is. Yes, many key components of this world refuse to even acknowledge the simple premise of absolute truth, which is a completely different topic. Now, a while ago, I learned of an interesting debate tactic that you're able to offer to someone who believes there is no faith, or no God for that matter. You give them one question, and you ask them, prove to me that I exist, and I will prove to you that God exists. Now, typically, a person who actually wants to debate and not just simply yell will probably first look at you in astonishment due to the absurdity of this question. And yes, it is an absurd question on both levels. The concept of proving the existence of another individual seems about as obvious as there possibly can be. Or then again, maybe it's not as obvious as we might think. In fact, on some levels, it's actually impossible, which is the point of the topic. Without faith, the challenge is impossible, and that's really the point of the debate. Here we have an individual who does not believe in God coming to a conclusion or an area of understanding that we both can agree on, that we must believe in some sort of faith. Just so that we are all on the same page here, is the idea that our five senses are 100% faith-driven, that they're not lying to us along with our bodies and brains. Okay, so you see, for me to realize that another individual in front of me exists, I am solely dependent on my senses, my sight, my touch, my smell, and hopefully not ever my taste. And there's no way for me to actually convey any of my senses to the other individual. It's all neurological synapses that are popping in my head that send signals to my brain, which then perceives the signals to say I see someone. Or if I shake their hands, I feel them with the same neurological senses. Hopefully I don't smell them, but that's the point here. I have one system in my body that I must have 100% faith in, that it works in a way I can comprehend. And how am I to know that what I sense as a blue sky would not be completely perceived as a red sky in someone else's system? Or what I taste to be a banana, someone else's system would taste it to be an apple? I admit, it gets kind of deep and confusing, but the point I believe is clear. We have to agree on some level of faith that our perceptions are the same. We each have 100% faith that this conversation is happening in a way that we both can agree on. Okay, in other words, this person in front of me is demonstrating 100% faith in something that they can't prove, or demonstrate, or convince me in any other form that first solely is relying on faith. I have to take them on their word that their senses are working appropriately in a way that my system can comprehend and agree with. But there's no other proof that they can offer for that. Just as I live on faith that God exists, it's literally the same principle. Having a working faith. Learning to live on faith in America can be a difficult road to follow, not like Pastor John Kay, but in different ways. And if we're not careful and diligent in our day-to-day life, make no mistake, we are on a path to where Pastor John Kay is currently. Each day, God will give us the opportunity to present our faith, usually in a silent method. Now, this seems bizarre to us because so many times in churches in past, we were told to vocally stand up on our faith or to scream to the tops of the hills. But let's be honest, in my experience, life hasn't been that full frontal yet. Personally, I might have to walk the streets and ignore buying a pastry, knowing that God has a better life for me, and I have to live on faith that that pastry is not the thing for me. By the way, I do struggle with weight, if you can't tell. Others have different types of issues that they struggle with, but guys, do we really even have to go down this road? Here's where the faith comes into play. Our culture, our reality dictates pleasure above all, and America has fattened us up like no other country has ever been fattened. Well, maybe Rome, but that was so long ago that, to be honest, nobody really knows. My point is this: we are at a very dangerous place in humanity, and this culture of America, The American man has so many distractions from what he truly needs to focus on that faith has to play such a strong, pivotal role in your life because you always have to be fighting day in and day out. All you have to do these days is pick up your phone and it's there. What is it? Well, it's whatever you're fighting. For a lot of us today, it has to do with life just becoming a lot harder for us. Everything's more expensive. The level of life we've been living has become threatened. And maybe we're not able to do as much as we're used to doing. To be honest, it kind of feels a lot like just a lot of groaning and complaining over things that really just don't need to be complained about. Hear me with what I'm saying here. I'm not just talking about small problems, but also where will I get food next week? Or how will I get a new job? Living a life of faith means living a life that is unconventional to today's standards. In Romans 10:17, it says, "So faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ." And 2 Corinthians 5:7, we read, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." And then in Hebrews 11:6, it says, "And without faith it is impossible to hear him. For the one who comes to God must believe that he exists, and that he proves to be one who rewards those who seek him." Now with these verses, we see the origination of faith. Faith comes from hearing directly from Christ, which is not something that can easily be attained, is it? And the only way that is demonstrated that we can hear from Christ is through his word. Therefore, the first aspect of how to have faith is to read his word. Now, just a quick survey. How many here are actually diligently reading his word? And how many of you who are reading scripture are seeking advice and not just simply having a daily doldrum? Now understand, I'm not necessarily seeking affirmation about your spiritual health or where you might be in your personal walk, but I would guess that a large percentage of those watching, at best, have not been reading in their Bible recently. Why is this so hard for our culture? Why is this so difficult for those that claim to be Christians to read the Bible? Of course, we've mentioned this before about how our culture is very suicidal in many of its tendencies. But it is really very simple, which is why I would like to call the Bible the great simplifier. If you want faith, read the Bible. Now, the next step is self-explanatory. Our lives are meant to walk in faith, not sight. Of course, this is so much easier said than done, as our world collides daily with so many visual cues and references that boggle the mind. We have a tendency to be all ADHD when we pick up our phones. But it is crucial that if you want to walk, it's by faith and not by what you see around you. Isn't it interesting that he chooses to clarify this point? God knows and recognizes the fact that this world will consume us if we allow it. We need to have a daily understanding that what we see is not truth, and that truth only comes from one direction. Now, finally, we see that there's only one way to actually please God, and that is with faith. In fact, without faith, it is completely impossible to please him. And as we mentioned earlier with our little challenge from these that are nominal or believe God does not exist, it all truly hinges on the fact that first you have to believe God exists. And not only that, those who seek him out will be rewarded for doing so. How many of you have actually tested this? How many of you have actually chosen to live in faith? I'd love to hear your thoughts in your comments below. These are the challenges for this week. First, you must read the Word. This is the only way you're going to be able to even seed the concept of faith into your bodies. And then once you have that faith, begin walking in the direction that faith dictates. Now, this might seem extremely bizarre initially, and believe me, it can become very lonely sometimes because everyone else seems to be going in one direction, and your faith seems to want to draw you in a different direction. But if we live this faith, this life of faith, completely enveloped in the concept that he exists, we are guaranteed to be rewarded for that. So that is something to take heart in. Wrap up. Our culture dictates an absence of faith in such a way that we're practically commanded to not live in faith, but in the security of man or the favor of man. And yes, the idea of living a life of faith will probably be deemed a difficult life. But one time I was told a phrase by my father before he passed away in 2007. Now, being a preacher himself, I was regularly used to him speaking on the Bible and about the relationship that we are supposed to have with God. And he made this statement: live your life as close to God as possible, and then live life normally. Watch how your life will become anything but normal. All these years later, and I still think about how simple of a concept that is. And yet it's something that I have to daily fight to tell myself to do. Anybody else have that problem? Rick Warren once said, the situations that will stretch your faith most will be those times when life falls apart and God is nowhere to be found. This happened to Job. Now, Job is just another level of faith that I barely can comprehend myself, maybe left for another video. But what Warren says rings true. We all are aware that life can fall apart. If that has not happened to you, plan on it. Because chances are it doesn't just happen once, but if you are filled with faith, those times will have a much smaller impact on you and those around you. Now, I've been there more than once. My wife and I have declared bankruptcy, had a house foreclosed on us. I've been laid off more than once. We were even technically homeless for a while. And in my opinion, the one thing that has made all those moments small drops in the horrors of life is that we live daily without one of our children. It's true, there's no greater baggage a man can carry than to breathe each breath as life goes on, carrying you away from the one you lost. As it stands, it's a component in life that I fight each day, and I have a faith deeper than I can explain here because of her. I know I'll see her again another day, just not on this earth. I have faith in that. Now it's your turn. How have you been affected by faith? Do you have any challenges or obstacles in front of you that only faith can overcome? Is what you see in front of you so blinding there seems to be no path forward? Or maybe I missed something when it comes to faith. I will admit these videos, in my opinion, barely scratch the surface for the concepts, and I feel I will most certainly return to many of these topics in the future. But for now, I would love to hear your thoughts on the topics. Thank you for listening throughout the entire video, and please definitely subscribe or follow me or join the Godly Guy Stuff group on Gab. Now, Gab is currently launching the headquarters of the content that is produced for Godly Guy Stuff. So if you're watching this on some other platform, you're probably missing more content that you could be seeing posted on the Gab GGS group. Now, I also have an upcoming locals community where I'm thinking of posting video schedules and doing more personal connections if these videos take off. These first few videos are kind of a test to see if I can build a base with the concept. Links are in the descriptions below, so if you want to become connected and be part of the Godly Guy Stuff build, let me know. Head on over to Gab today and keep a lookout for locals potentially soon. I look forward to talking to you and having this conversation continue. Thanks.